John Kerry. Statement before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Delivered by John Kerry on April 22nd of 1971 in Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Senator Fulbright, Senator Javits, Senator Symington, Senator Pell. I would like to say for the record that, and also for the men behind me, who are also wearing the uniforms and the medals, that my sitting here is really symbolic. I'm not here as John Kerry. I'm here as one member of a group of Sergeant, which is a small representation of a very much large group of veterans in this country. And were it possible for all of them to sit at this table, they would be here and have the same kind of testimony. I'd simply like to speak in general terms. I apologize if my statement is general because I received notification yesterday that you would hear me, and I'm afraid because of the injunction I was at most of the night and I haven't had a great deal of chance to prepare. I would like to talk representing of all of the veterans and say that several months ago in Detroit we had an investigation of over 150 honorably discharged and many very highly decorated veterans testified to war crimes committed in Southeast Asia. These were not isolated incidents, but crimes committed on a day-to-day basis with the full awareness of officers at all levels of command. It's impossible to describe to you exactly what did happen in Detroit, the emotions in the room, and the feelings of the men who were reliving the experiences in Vietnam. But they did. They relived the absolute horror of what this country, in a sense, made them do. They were told the stories of that time when they were personally raped, cut off ears, cut off heads, taped wires from portable telephones to human and turned up the power, cut up of limbs, blown up bodies, randomly shot at civilians, raised villages in the fashion reminiscent of Genghis Khan, shot cattle and dogs for fun, poisoned food snacks, and generally ravaged the countryside of South Vietnam, in addition to the normal ravage of the war and the normal and very particular ravaging which is done by the applied bombing power of this country. We've called since the investigation the Winter Soldier investigation. The term Winter Soldier is a play on words of Thomas Paine's in 1776 when he spoke of the Sunshine Patriot and summertime soldiers who deserted at Valley Forge because the going was rough. And we who have come here to Washington have come here because we feel we have the Winter Soldiers now. We could come back to this country and do things. And we could be quiet. We could hold our silence. We could tell them what went on in Vietnam. But we feel because of what threatens this country, the fact that crime threatens it, not redcoats, but crimes which we're committing are what threatens it. And we have to speak out. I would like to talk to you a little bit about the result of the feelings these men carry with them after coming back from Vietnam. The country doesn't know it yet, but it's created a monster in the form of millions of men who have been taught to deal and to trade in violence, and who are given the chance to die for the biggest nothing in the history. Men who have returned with a sense of anger and a sense of betrayal which no one has yet grasped. As a veteran, and one who feels this anger, I'd like to talk about it. We're angry because we feel we have used the worst fashion by the administration of the country. In 1970, at West Point, Vice President Agnew said, "Some glamorize the criminal misfits of society, while our best men die in Asian rice paddles and paddies to preserve the freedoms which most misfits abuse." And this was used as a rallying point for our effort in Vietnam. But for us, his boys in Asia, whom the country was supposed to support, his statement is a terrible distortion from which we can draw only a very deep sense of revolution, and hence the anger of some of the men who are here in Washington today. It's a distortion because we are in no way consider ourselves the best men of this country, because those he called misfits were standing up for us in a way that nobody else in the country dared to. Because so many who have died would have returned to this country to join the misfits in their efforts to ask for an immediate withdrawal from South Vietnam. because so many of these best men have returned as quadriplegics and amputees, and they lie forgotten in the veteran administration hospitals in this country, which fly the flag which so many have chosen as their own personal symbol. And we cannot consider ourselves the America's best men when we are ashamed of and hated what we call to do in Southeast Asia. In our opinion, and from our experience, there is nothing in South Vietnam, nothing which could have happened realistically to threaten the United States of America. And to attempt to justify the loss of one American life in Vietnam, Cambodia, or Laos by linking such loss to the preservation of freedom, which those misfits supposedly abused, was the height of the criminal hypocrisy. And it's that kind of hypocrisy which we feel has torn this country apart. We're probably much more angry than that, and I don't want to go into the foreign policy aspect because I'm outclassed here. I know that all of you talked about every possible alternative for getting out of Vietnam. We understand that. We know that you've considered the seriousness of the aspects, the utmost level, and I'm not going to try to deal on that. But I want to relate to you the feelings of those many of the men who returned to this country express, because we are probably angriest about all, that we were told about Vietnam and about the mystical war against communism. We found that not only was it a civil war, an effort to the people who had for years been trying to seeking their liberation from any colonial influence whatsoever, but also we found that the Vietnamese, whom we had enthusiastically molded after our own image, were hard trying to put up and take up the fight against the threat which we were supposedly saving them from. Found that the people didn't even know the difference between communism and democracy. They only wanted to work in rice paddies without helicopters, starving them, and bombs with napalm, burning their villages and tearing their country apart. They wanted everything to do with war, particularly with the foreign presence of the United States of America, to leave them alone in peace. And they practiced the art of survival by siding with whichever military force was present at the time, be it the Viet Cong, or Vietnamese, the American. We also found out that all too many American men were dying in those rice paddies for want support for our allies. We saw firsthand how monies from American taxes was used to corrupt dictatorial regions. We saw that many people in this country had one-sided ideas and who was kept free by our flag, as blacks provided the highest percentage of casualties. We saw Vietnamese ravaged equally by American bombs, as well as the search and destroy missions, as well as the Viet Cong terrorism. And yet we listened while this country tried to blame all the havoc on the Viet Cong. We rationalized destroying villages in order to save them. We saw America lose her sense of morality as we expected and accepted her coolly a mileage, a lie, and refused to give up the image of the American soldiers that cut out chocolate bars and chewing gum. We learned the meaning of free fire zones, shoot anything that moves, and watched while America placed a cheapness on the lives of Orientals. We watched the United States participants of the body counts, and the fact that the glorification of the body counts. We listened while, month after month, we were told that the back of the enemy was about to break. Without using weapons against the Oriental human beings, with quotation marks around that. Without using weapons against those people, which I do not believe this country would dream of using, while we are fighting in a European theater, or let us say a non-third world people's theater. And so watched while men charged up hills because a general said that hill has to be taken. And after losing one platoon or two platoons, they marched away to leave the hill for recomputation by the North Vietnamese. Because they watched pride and allowed the most unimportant battles to be blown into extravaganzas. Because we can't lose and we couldn't retreat. And because it didn't matter how the American bodies were lost to prove that point. And so were Hamburger Hills, and Kissans, and Hill 881s, and Firebase 6s, and so many others. And now we're told that the men who fought there must watch quietly while America lives are lost, and American lives are lost, and so that we can experience and exercise the incredible arrogance of the Vietnamizing of the Vietnamese. Each day, each day, each. I hope you won't interrupt. He's making a significant statement. Let him proceed. Each day to facilitate the process by which the United States washes her hands of Vietnam. Someone has to give up his life so that the United States doesn't have to admit something that the entire world already knows. So that we can't say what we've made a mistake. Someone has to die so President Nixon wouldn't be, and these are his words, the first president to lose a war. And we are asking Americans to think about that, because how do you ask a man to be the last man to die in Vietnam? How do you ask a man to be the last man to die for a mistake? But we're trying to do that, and we're going to try to do it with thousands of rationalizations. And if you read carefully the president's last speech to the people of the country, you can see that he says this clearly. But the issue, gentlemen, the issue of communism, and the question is whether or not we will leave that country to the communists, or whether or not we should have learned that lesson by now. But the problem of the veterans goes beyond this personal problem, because you think about the poster in this country with a picture of Uncle Sam. And the picture says, "I want you." And a young man comes out of high school and says, "That's fine, I'm going to serve my country." And he goes out to Vietnam, he shoots and kills, and he does his job. Or maybe he doesn't shoot, but he just goes and comes back. And then, when he gets back to his country, he finds that he really isn't wanted. Because the largest unemployment figure in the country, it depends on whoever you ask. The Veteran Administration, 15%. Various other sources, 22%. But the largest figure of the unemployed are black. That means 1 out of every 10 of the nation's unemployed is a veteran of Vietnam. The hospitals across the country won't or can't meet their demands. It's not a question that they're not trying. They haven't got the appropriations. A man recently died after he had the tracheotomy in California. Not because of the operation, but because there wasn't enough personnel to clean the mucus out of his tube, and he suffered. And he suffocated to death. Another young man just died in New York VA hospital the other day. A friend of mine was lying in a bed, 2 beds away, and tried to help him, but he couldn't. They rang a bell, and there was no one to service that man, and so he died of convulsions. 57%. I understand that 50% of all those entering the VA hospitals talk about suicide. Some 27% have tried because they come back to this country and they have faced what they did and what they did in Vietnam, and they come back and find the indifference of a country that doesn't really care. And suddenly we are faced with the sickening situation in this country because there's no moral indignation. If there is, it comes from people who are almost exalted by their past indignities. And I know that many of them are sitting in front of me. This country seems to have laid down and accepted something as serious as Laos. Just as we calmly shrugged off the loss of the 700,000 lives of the Pakistan, the so-called greatest disasters of all time. But we are here as the veterans to say that we think we are in the midst of the greatest disaster of all times now, because they are still dying out there. And not just Americans, Vietnamese, and we are rationalizing that leaving that country so that these people can go on killing each other for years to come. Americans seem to have accepted the idea that war is winding down. At least for Americans. They have also allowed the bodies, which were once used for presidents, for statistics, to prove that we were winning this war, to be used as evidence as a man who followed orders and who interpreted these orders no differently than more hundreds of thousands of other men in South Vietnam. We veterans can look with amazement on the fact that this country has not been able to help and see that there's absolutely no difference between a ground troop and a helicopter crew. And yet, people have accepted the difference and fit them to the administration. No ground troops are Laos. So it's alright to kill Laotians by remote control. But, believe me, the Vietnamese and Laotian countryside as anyone else. But believe me, the helicopter crews fill the same body bags and wreak the same kind of damage as the Vietnamese and the Laotian countryside as anyone else. And the president is talking about allowing them to go for many years to come. And one can only ask if we will really be satisfied when the troops march into Hanoi. We're asking here in Washington for some action action from the Congress of the United States of America, which has the power to rise and maintain armies, in which, by its Constitution, also has the power to declare war. We've come here, not to the President, because we believe this body can be responsive to the will of the people. I believe that the will of the people says that we should be out of Vietnam now. We're here in Washington also to say that the problem of war is not just a question of war and diplomacy. It's part and parcel of everything that we are trying to do as human beings to communicate to people in this country. The question of the racism, which is rampant in the military, and so many other questions. The use of the weapons, which is rampant in the military, and so other questions. The hypocrisy in our taking umbrage in the Geneva Conventions, and using that as justification for the continuation of the war. When we are more guilty than any of the other body of violations in these Geneva Conventions, in the use of the free fire zones, harassment and direction fire, accepted policy by many of the units in the South Vietnam. That's what we're trying to say. It's part and parcel of everything. An American Indian friend of mine who lives in the Indian nation of Alacatas put it to me very succinctly. He told me how a boy on an Italian reservation watched television and he used to cheer the cowboys when they came in and shot the Indians. And then suddenly one day he stopped in Vietnam and he said, "My God, I'm doing to these people the very same thing that was done to my people." And he stopped. And that's when we're trying to say that we think this thing has to end. We're also here to ask, why are we here to ask vehemently, where are the leaders of our country? Where is the leadership? We're here to ask, where are McNamara, Roscoe, Bundy, Kilpatrick, and so many others? Where are they when we, the men whom they sent off to war, have returned? These are the commanders who have decided and deserted their troops, and there is no more serious crime in the war. The army says that they will never leave their wounded, and the Marines say that they will never leave even their dead. These men have left all the casualties and restricted behind a PS shield of public rectitude. They let the rest and the real stuff of their reputations bleaching behind them in the sun in this country. And finally, this administration has done us the ultimate dishonor. They've attempted to disown us and sacrifices we made for this country. In their blindness and fear, they have tried to deny that we are veterans or we serve in Nam. We do not need their testimony. Our own scars and the stumps of limbs are witnesses enough for others and for ourselves. We wish that a merciful God could wipe away our memories of our service as easily as this administration has wiped their memories of us. And all that they have done and all that they can do, this is by denial, to make more clear that ever our own demonstration and determination to undertake one last mission, to search out and destroy the last vestige of this barbaric war, to pacify our own hearts, to conquer the fear that has driven this country these last 10 years, and more, and more. And so in 30 years from our brothers go down to the street without a leg, without an arm or a face, and small boys ask why, you are able to be saying Vietnam, and not mean a desert, not a filthy obscene memory, but mean instead when America finally turned and where soldiers like us helped it in the turning. Thank you. I thank everyone who has watched all this and also has supported me along the way. Special thanks to everyone who helped me. I'll see you guys in my next episode. Shannon out. Peace.